Hey guys, welcome to the video. We're going to talk about yoga, how it's really, really good. But in this particular video, we're going to talk about how it can influence your back pain, as so many people, maybe even you, have tried doing yoga in the past or looking to do yoga exercises to help relieve back pain. And if we're not aware of these things, then we're really going to fall foul and it's not going to work. And if you've somehow come across this video and you don't have any back pain or have never had back pain, then this video probably isn't for you, so I wouldn't worry about it. Reason being, if you've got a healthy spine and have no issues in that lower back region, then a lot of these talking points aren't really going to affect you. But if you do have back issues and you're trying to resolve them and you're working hard, then the tips in this particular video on these 5 different yoga exercises are really going to help you better understand what you should be doing and why you should be doing it and why you should be avoiding some of these really important points. And no, this isn't another video that's going to be bashing yoga. We're going to be really helpful. We're going to talk about these particular exercises and a few tweaks, ways in which you can adjust them and considerations that you can make so you can have the most success with your exercises. And maybe it's a case of when should we be doing these as well. That's an important thing to consider with any sort of back pain rehab program, whether it's yoga, whether it's Pilates, whether it's this exercise, that exercise, the Back in Shape program, whatever it may be. Different things come at different times in that recovery process, and this should really help you. And we'll kick things off by explaining a very brief overview of the specific nuances of back pain. So when you injure your back, we've got an injury down here, we've got some tissue damage, and the big complication around back pain is that some of the movements that you'll do, for example, if we've got sciatica or a bulging disc or stenosis, we're going to want a forward bend because it takes pressure off, but that's actually making it worse. So having that in your mind is really important. This is an injury down here, and we want to bear that in mind. So frequently, if we've got injuries to the discs, a degree of stenosis associated with that, or degenerative disc disease, those sorts of problems, herniated bulging disc leading to things like sciatica, those forward bends are actually going to aggravate the tissues that are injured, whilst unfortunately or fortunately providing a little bit of temporary relief. That allows you to get into this false sense of security and make things worse without knowing it. The second one is the facet joints on the back. Well, if we've got drop discs on the front or injuries to the discs on the front and they're smaller, they create less space, or that you lose the space between those discs. So the bony joints, the full bone, moves closer together. So any sort of backward bending is more likely to catch these facet joints a little bit sooner. And then we have the combination of complex movements. In yoga, there are various poses, which we'll discuss in this video, that involve multiple movements. One of the big ones for facet problems down the back here, or involvement of facets in our injuries, are any of those twisting and backward bending. They're going to really stress those facets. And quite equally, the twisting and forward bending is going to really grind those discs, and we're not going to like that at all. So these are the key things we're looking out for when we're talking about these poses. So maybe even write those down. That's really, really important. And the final point is remembering, when you've got back pain, when you've got a back injury, there is tissue damage. And in the early parts of tissue damage, we don't want to be aggravating and moving that area. We'll get straight on to this particular topic in the first one, which is going to be that cat-cow pose. And just before we get into the cat-cow, we know that everyone does yoga for all sorts of different reasons. So let us know in the comments below. This is so important and really the ongoing theme, which we'll probably touch on later in this video. Why are we doing this? There are so many different benefits for yoga. And what are your personal reasons for doing it? It may not actually be back pain. You may say, do you know what? My back pain is stopping me do yoga because I really enjoy the mental benefits, all these other benefits that come alongside yoga, and because of my back pain, I can't do it. That's very different in terms of the mental approach to someone that is doing yoga for their back pain. So let's consider that. Let us know in the comments, why are you doing yoga, and what is the purpose, and what do you get out of it? So number one, the cat-cow. Following on from my last comments, the cat-cow is something that essentially is mobilizing the spine. It's moving these joints. And if we're early on in a back pain injury, if we've just flared things up, if we've just injured the discs, or if we've got recurring ongoing injuries where it's not healing properly, something like the cat-cow that takes the spine through what I will say are extreme ranges of motion, flexion and extension. That's flexion that way and then extension that way. When you're watching some of these videos with these really good yoga instructors, they're able to move through a very large range of motion. But if we have a little scab, and I'll take a little part of the spine right here, okay, this could be anywhere, but just bear that in mind. If we've torn some of the tissues in here and we're going through a real flexion, that's not a good idea. That's not going to be good for these tissues. Now, later on in a recovery process, a little bit of gentle strain on these tissues actually really helps them remodel. And this is just a general principle of healing and something we talk about a lot in Back in Shape. These general principles of healing mean that we have to put tissues under stress in order for them to heal as best as possible. But if you've just come out of a back pain problem, quite often these are the exercises that you're given, things like cat-cow, oh, get that spine moving again, that's really important. No, we don't want to be doing cat-cow at that point in time. Much in the future, when things are remodeling and strengthening, we can incorporate a little bit of conservative cat-cow within limited ranges of motion to just help those tissues remodel a little bit. But in the early parts, it's not one that we want to be doing. So what are you going to do instead? I've just said you can't move your back. Well, we do want movements, but we want small movements. So for example, when you've just injured your back, the small movements that go through the spine as we're walking around, as we're going for a small walk around the block or a small walk around the house, those small undulating movements are what we want to help get the lower back drained of excess inflammation and keep a little bit of movement to prevent excessive nasty scar tissue buildup. But those excessive ranges aren't something for that early stage back pain. There's something that we can do much further on in the back rehab process. Number 2 are the warrior poses, and we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3 here because one of them, number 1, has maybe a little area where you can get caught out, and 2 and 3 are actually pretty good. But we want to draw your attention to a few things. Number 1, with warrior pose number 1, there is the tendency as we're going into that pose for a little bit of excessive arching in the lower back. And this maybe shouldn't be the case because if our hips are too tight and they're not working properly, and this is the story through more or less all of the yoga exercises, where we have stiffness and rigidity, it's going to mean that other areas are going to compensate. And this is just so common because a lot of cases of lower back issues will have influences on the muscles around the legs to make the hips a little bit more stiff. And if we're then trying to do a whole body move like warrior number 1, we're going to possibly mean that we're arching our back a little bit more to compensate for the lack of flexibility in the hips, for example. And that runs the risk of irritating these facet joints. So maybe you're not going quite as upright into that position. Maybe you don't go as low in the lunge position, part of the warrior 1 exercise, but we focus on maintaining a neutral spine. Maintain that neutral spine so it can be held and supported throughout this particular pose, and make sure we're not arching our back too much. When we get into a pose like warrior 2, this is actually really good, and they actually gradually get better for you. But again, warrior 2 is maybe a little bit more of a beginner's pose with the context of back pain because we're very upright. We're in that position, the arms are out, the legs are engaged, the core is engaged, we're holding everything steady. Now you'll see different instructions online about tucking, etc. of the pelvis. We want to focus on a maintenance of a neutral spine. That doesn't involve any pelvic tucks, that involves maintenance of a neutral spine. And that is really the important principle. And we can do that actually very, very well in warrior pose 2. Now let's get on to warrior pose number 3 because this one does require a little bit more complexity. And if you're early on in a back pain rehab process and we've got some underlying issues there that aren't allowing us to effectively control our core, we need to consider these things. Warrior number 3 involves a good degree of skill, competence, and balance. So if we've got back pain, we may want to sit this one out, or you could potentially do it with a slight bend in the knee or having some degree of support nearby so you can balance yourself a little bit better. But it is a more advanced one, I would say, when you're going through back pain rehab. But the nice thing about warrior 3 is that it teaches you a very important thing. It teaches you to move on the hip socket independent of spinal movement. And that's to say we're going down into that position on the hip rather than the spine bending itself to get into the pose. It's a very, very nice one, and we do similar sort of exercises in some of the Back in Shape phase 4 exercises where we're using this sort of principle, a single pivot point around one hip, to help us learn to move the spine in a very effective way that doesn't strain the lower lumbar spine. One of the big, I suppose, criticisms of these so far is that they're not really going to be building your strength in an objective manner. It's very difficult to enhance these particular poses without using any additional equipment, and it can be a little bit complex and cumbersome to make them a bit more challenging. So we can't necessarily engage in a progressive manner of doing these exercises to rebuild strength. So although it's nice to go through these flows, that's when we come all the way back to that question, why am I doing yoga? What am I getting out of it? And if we're getting out that breathing, that relaxation, that almost meditation type process and that mindfulness as we're doing it, then that's separate to that rehabilitation and strengthening stuff that we're really looking to do to help our back pain for the long term. Number 3, we're talking about tree pose. And this pose is perfect. There's not really any criticism. And this is a nice one which is going to help you work your balance. It's going to help you work a degree of flexibility and have to engage that core while we're on that one leg. So really no criticisms of a pose like the tree. And other poses that are going to be similar to this, where we're just engaging the core and we're using other movements, maybe it's popping that one leg up, popping the arms up, to really challenge the body a little bit more in that balance side of things, is really, really good. So a pose like the tree is going to really help you be aware of your posture. Again, we don't want any silly tucking or anything like that of the pelvis, any movement. We want to maintain that neutral spine. But these sorts of postures do help engage, open things out, and help you really center yourself and work on those postural muscles in a very static but balance-driven way. We're moving more towards the last two exercises, which have a bit more criticism to them. Not necessarily in the way of the exercise when done perfectly, but more the individual's ability to do these exercises. And again, we're looking at these through the lens of I have back pain and I'm trying to help my back, not I want to do yoga and I have no back pain, because those two people are very, very different and they have very, very different needs. That's really important. So we've got a pose like the half moon. This is very similar in some respects to the Warrior 3, in so much as it's got some of those same benefits. But again, it's requiring a good degree of trunk stability alongside hip flexibility to do it properly and maintain that neutral spine. We need our adductors and our hamstrings to really allow our body to tip over to the side. And this is where adaptations, like I've seen on certain videos online, the use of a block, but you might want to use an actual chair, because your flexibility and your difficulty level for these sorts of exercises might actually be that much so. We're not able to do them correctly to start with without using a chair and only going through such a small range of motion. And that's a principle that we talk about a lot in Back in Shape, reducing the range of motion, finding ways to make this exercise safe for you, effective for you, without compromising form and spinal integrity, which is something that could very easily happen. Even though this is on the surface of it, when done correctly, a very good exercise or an acceptable exercise, a nice exercise, a yoga pose, it can throw up challenges due to its more complex nature in terms of what it demands of your body. Finally, we've got the downward dog, which is such a common yoga pose, such an iconic yoga pose, and this really feeds on from what I was just saying about the half moon. In order to do this pose correctly, we need a large amount of upper body strength, shoulder stability, because if our shoulders aren't properly locked out, we're going to require more upper body strength in order to hold that position. There's the risk of us rounding our lower back as we're doing this, and in fact, in some of the videos that I've seen online, they encourage you to draw that belly button in and flatten out and elongate the spine. Some of the things that I've seen maybe suggest not so much a full understanding of how the spine actually works, and let me show you what I'm talking about. It's always important to speak specifically when we're talking about the spine, and in the downward dog position, the limiting factor, the hamstrings need to be flexible. To take the hamstrings off strain, we can round our lower back like so. And as we're drawing our belly button in, we can do that sort of posterior pelvic tuck, and it's going to stretch out the spine through here, and it's going to shorten the hamstrings. Conversely, if we engage our core but hold a neutral spine, we're actually going to elongate the hamstrings more, which is going to make this exercise a little bit more strenuous on those hamstrings, and we're going to require greater flexibility to do it correctly. The reason I'm mentioning this is because we want to be mindful of what is actually happening when we're doing this exercise. And to do a downward dog, we require extreme flexibility. And most of the videos that I've seen online involve people with extreme flexibility. These guys doing these yoga classes, these yoga instructors, are really good athletes. They are fantastic in their strength and flexibility. They've invariably been doing it for many, many years. And when you have back pain, picking up something like yoga can be just the wrong thing to do if we're comparing their technique. It's like comparing yourself to an Olympic weightlifter in terms of watching them do the form with their particular lift and then you trying to emulate that. There are so many small steps in between where you may be right now having back pain and your available skill and their competence to be able to do something like a downward dog in a safe way that doesn't challenge the spine in inappropriate manners. If we could do it properly, then we probably wouldn't have the back pain anyway. So that's something to really consider. Watch, if you're doing these sorts of things, these yoga exercises, watch the skill of the instructor and compare their flexibility and competence to yours and see how big that gap is. But I will say the biggest observation is that there's a very large gap between the instructor and the individual without back pain, let alone the limitations that you might have with back pain. At the end of the day, yoga is fantastic and it has so many benefits for so many people. But ask yourself that question we asked you at the start of this video. Why are you trying to do yoga? What do you want to do it for? What are the purposes? And when we've got back pain, we need to go go through a number of set, clear processes in a graded way to slowly improve our strength, competence, flexibility, and our general well-being. And that needs to be built up slowly. And that's why we've got things like the Back in Shape program and the support that's there to really guide you through that process. And then can you go onto yoga in the future? Can you do these yoga exercises? Yes, but hopefully this video has brought out a few limitations, a few things that you can watch out for in the future to consider and actually apply to a whole host of yoga exercises. Do I have the flexibility to do this pose the way it's shown on the board or shown on the video? Do I have the strength to be able to do it like so? And if not, what can I do to break it down into a smaller bite-sized chunks? Do I need to work on my hamstring flexibility? Well, is it necessarily the best option to try and improve your hamstring flexibility while you're balanced in a downward dog position? Or might it be a safer, more sensible route to work on your hamstring flexibility in a more standard way to start to build that up to closer to what's required, and then we can come back to these sorts of yoga flows. There are some great yoga poses that we've discussed in this video today that are really, really good and will help you and you can introduce into your general well-being practice very, very early on in the process, relatively speaking. But in terms of rebuilding your back, strengthening things up, we want a program that's dedicated to it, not has back pain as a minor focus in the side. Focus on something that's 100% about fixing your back. And things like yoga that have so many other benefits, we can do those at another time. So if you watched the video this far, hopefully you found this video really helpful in just changing your perception about where yoga can fit in, how you can change some of these exercises. If you did find it helpful, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, because we do tons of videos like this to really help you better understand your back and how you can get your back pain fixed from home more effectively. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another video. If you want to learn more about the premium Back in Shape membership, there's going to be a video somewhere underneath here. And if you want to stay up to date or tune in to some of our more recent live streams and the Q&As at the end of those, then that's going to be down here. And remember, you can subscribe to the channel up here and hit the notification bell to make sure you know when we next go live, so you can join us for our next live stream and Q&A.